I'm so glad you're back, Doctor. Now we can walk this path together. Me with you, and you with me.
Good evening, Doctor. Seeing as these next few days are going to be pivotal for Rhodes Island, I'd like to highlight Amiya for our talks today. Our beloved leader of Rhodes Island, the Sarkaz King, the Lords of Fiends, the Outblood King. She holds quite a few titles, and I hope by the end of today you'll appreciate the nuance behind each one. This report likely won't be touching much from folders 13 or 14 of PRTS's campaign logs, as I, unfortunately, still need some time to go through the available intelligence. So please consider this preparation for diving into current events, rather than a recap of them. So, in this report, I'd like to touch on the Black Crown that was bestowed upon Amiya. I'd like to remind you of the Sarkaz's history of strife that makes the crown weigh heavily upon her head. And, though I imagine it'll be a painful reminder, we can't ignore the means by which Amiya was bestowed the crown either. And finally, I'd like to use all of that to unpack a moment that, admittedly, occurred in File 12 of PRTS's current campaign logs. But I believe that moment echoes throughout Amiya's story, and offers important context to her eventual meeting with the Echo of Teresa.
Once, there was a Sarkaz betrayed, who walked this land bent on vengeance, only to cast his own life into the cycle of revenge. What I can't understand is, he'd already settled on his own end before he drew his sword. In his rage, he settled on death, with a clear mind.
This is a subject he would have remembered fairly well in the past. It is an artifact of a long-lost civilization that once traveled the stars, desperately searching for a form of immortality to stave off an inevitable extinction. You were deeply involved in its creation, and, humorously, the name Black Crown was offered by one of your colleagues, and struck down by another, when giving this creation a name. Instead, it was christened the Civilite Eterna, or the Eternal Light of Civilization. From my understanding, it allowed one to dive deeply into the heart and history of others, allowing you to intimately understand the souls of even strangers. And it would serve as an eternal record for your people for ages to come. Some commentary from Calcit leads me to believe its use is extended even beyond that, but, well, maybe it's not worth thinking too much about. After all, its legacy, its common name, and its use would be largely determined by the first Lord of Fiends who, millennia ago, would wander into a so-called Silver Mountain, ruins of your people, if I had to guess, and return with the crown upon their head. Do note that it was the act of wearing the crown that not only physically transformed them, but made this exile from their tribe the first Lord of Fiends. And I would also consider them the first king of the Sarkaz, though... Alright, a quick tangent here. The term Sarkaz didn't exist at this point. Shortly after the Lord of Fiends gathers a people around themselves, these natives of Terra take the name Tikaz, meaning one who owns a home, a prophetically ironic choice, as you'll see. It is much later in their history, when they've become a diaspora, a people scattered away from their homeland, that they will be derided as Sarkaz, and later still when they've embraced the title as a part of cultural identity. Categorization of the Sarkaz can be difficult, as they're made up of very many unique races, unified only by the fact that they all trace their lineage back to the original races that had a dominion over Terra. I know that opens a lot of knock-on questions, but we'll save that for another day. Circling back, the Lord of Fiends refers to the wielder of the Black Crown that appears over their heads. By some mechanism, it's absorbed into the body, appearing only to express its power or proclaim its choosing. And it does choose a wielder, usually upon the death of the prior one. How exactly a successor is chosen is a bit of a tangle, but we'll just focus on how Amiya was chosen a little later on. Alright, so, in a practical sense, what does wielding the crown mean for Amiya? Many of the records on what exactly the Black Crown allows its wielder to do is heavily redacted at my level of access, but there are still the obvious abilities that Amiya displays. 1. Her empathic abilities, also known as emotional absorption, allow her to not only peer into the essence of others, but even manipulate their memories or emotional state, a capacity that is only softly rivaled by Arturia's unique arts, which are already something of an outlier. This appears to be uniquely effective when affecting Sarkaz. 2. Her offensive casting capabilities, visually notable by the black lines they etch into the air. It wreaks havoc on her body, but it not only allows her to enhance her casting to obscene heights, but also resist and stifle the arts of others. I find it notable that this capacity is often considered a core part of a Sarkaz's unique relationship with Originium, increasing their rate of infection, but allowing them above-average ability to manipulate Originium arts. Of course, the degree to which Amiya can manipulate arts with the Black Crown's power is extraordinary, even among the Sarkaz as a whole. 3. Speaking of Sarkaz casting, or witchcraft, as it's often called, it also utilizes a unique collective memory that ties the Sarkaz together even after death. This would be the concept of the myriad souls PRTS tells me you've been researching. On an unconscious level, the myriad souls influence all Sarkaz. Nothing so extreme as a hive mind, but nothing so minor that the effect on their psychology is notable. The details are beyond me, but it is my belief that many of the unique capabilities of Sarkaz casting, such as the prophetic visions of the Cyclops or the elegies of the Banshee, are made possible by this racial trait that binds them together. And, to a degree that can be debated, losing the Black Crown allows Amiya to experience this collective memory. 4. Amiya herself utilizes this collective memory for a unique form of arts. During the Chernobog incident, she channels the memory of Kolum, a lord of fiends renowned for the blade, in order to channel his weapon and vambrace. She then simultaneously attuned to Cheng, using emotional absorption in order to mimic Chen's arts and swords techniques. This allowed her to suddenly, albeit temporarily, become a powerful frontline combatant. To give Amiya credit here, while the crown certainly is what allows this technique to be possible, it may be the case that Amiya is among the first to use the crown in such a way. But I need to do further research before I can make that claim confidently. There are certainly other capabilities that the Black Crown makes possible for the Lord of Fiends, but those are the 4 cases in Amiya I would confidently point towards. I'll also note that the scale of what's possible for her may expand in the near future. Limitations both mental and physical with the rings she wears have been placed onto Amiya since she was bestowed the crown at a very young age. Even if Amiya were not already infected, sustaining that level of power and flood of information would be difficult, deadly even, for someone with a developing mind, body, and arts mastery, after all.
What I saw that day. The despair stuck in my throat. Hopelessly trying to scream. I want to bury it all deep inside my mind and never let it out.
The considerable personal power of the Black Crown arguably still pales behind its cultural significance. The Lord of Fiends is prophesied to be both a savior and a destroyer. Given that the Lord of Fiends often has such a strong claim to the title of the King of Sarkaz, it makes sense to me that the Sarkaz would ping these hopes upon them. Some interpret these prophecies to simply show that Amiya, as the Lord of Fiends, holds great power, but how that power is used will shape the future. This is true, but there's another, more literal layer to the weight on Amiya's heart you should appreciate, Dokutah. The prophecy she bears is not a mere Aesop about power, nor is it simply a declaration of her importance in history. Remember what Kaltsip explains when you all faced Patriot. Sarkaz's prophecy is not handed down by any infallible god of fate. It is simply a vision of the future, crafted from the collective wisdom of all Sarkaz souls that have lived and died on Terra, as well as their collective pain. The prophecy that weighs on Amiya's shoulder is not merely a warning about her power and influence. It is the fervent, desperate prayer of millions of Sarkaz who long for a home but saw their walls crumble again and again. 3,421 times did these collective souls witness the walls of their home crumble. It is the resigned will of the Sarkaz who turn themselves into tools of war to be used by outblood masters. Sarkaz mercenaries are loathed as brutes and valued for how cheap their lives are to purchase and discard. It is the impotent rage of Sarkaz who saw glory and vengeance, only to be cut down and humiliated, each time their wrath growing like a hydra losing a head. It is the shameful tears of a Sarkaz who sought peace and acceptance, only to be cut down and humiliated, each time their despair grows and calcifies like Nethersea brand across the heart. This, I believe, is the most vital nature of the prophecy, Dokutah. Not as vague wisdom, not a vision snatched away from the future, but a wish, passed down and amplified by every soul that came before. A desperate, terrifying demand that has had millennia to grow in strength, more than her shoulders should have to carry. Not that I imagine anyone who should, mind you, but I know how painful it must be for you to see this cup pass into Amiya's hands, specifically. Many cruel truths on Terra aren't as they should be, but if we don't accept the world for what it is, we'll have no say in what it will be. Sorry, excuse the bad poetry. I think that Trilby Asher is rubbing off on me. But what I'm trying to say is that Amiya is sometimes the type to put on a brave face. Perhaps because her emotional absorption makes it far too easy for her to see the pain in others and makes her loath to share her own. So, if we want to be able to help her, if we want her to have a good life, we can't let ourselves look away from just how severe the weight she's under is. Of course, that does bring us nicely to a question. Amiya was born a Cautus, and a Billy-born girl besides. The Sarkaz plight is severe, even on a social level, and to see the effect revenants have on the Sarkaz, I can have nothing but respect for the Sarkaz who bear that weight. But how did it come to be that Amiya's fate became tied up with their fight? How did it come to be that an outblood wears the crown of the Sarkaz kings?
Making it this far has cost us so much. Sometimes I can't help but ask myself, is it really worth it?
My next set of notes all have to do with the memories of Terra that are, no longer part of you, Doctor, even if they are still of you. I know a lot of this will be difficult to face, so if at any point you need time to pause and collect yourself, please just let me know. But to begin, years ago, you brought Amiya to Rhodes Island. Well, in those days, Rhodes Island was just the name of the land ship that moved under the flag of Babel. In any case, you decided to wander Terra in order to understand this world and its plight. On that journey, you discovered a small Cautus girl. Young though she was, she had already been giving a fair share of tragedy in her life. She was infected, her parents had died, and what meager chance at life she would have had was interrupted by a bandit raid. You saved her, first by pulling her out of the wreckage, and then by keeping her close to you, determined to give this little Cautus a better life than she would have had if you left her with her billeting authorities. She was the one that made you decide that you'd seen enough of the world to make a decision. Because of you, she gained treatment. Because of you, she felt loved. Not just by you, but by Calcit, Savage, Teresa, and in truth, most of Babel saw her as part of the future they were fighting for. In return, she loved that family of Babel that you brought her to. She loved the memories you made with Savage along the way. She loved the tenderness that the serious and stern Calcit showed her, as she slipped the girl candy and offered Amiya to take part in Babel as its leader. She loved the stories Teresa loved her to sleep with. Most of all, she loved you, Doctor. Something that I'm sure you felt in your first confusing months after your amnesic revival. However, you must have also felt Calcit's bitter wrath at the time. And that's because, for a number of reasons, the Doctor you were then made a certain decision. The reasons fall outside of what I'd like to talk about today, but the result of that decision has quite a bit to do with Amiya. Because of that decision, Babel crumbled and was forced to flee on the day that it would have had its great victory, shedding its old name and becoming Rhodes Island. Teresa died as she fought off assassins that flooded into the landship, assassins that you had arranged for. She embraced Amiya as she bled out. The poor girl just so happened to wander into the room as the assassins arrived. Thankfully, Teresa fought fiercely to not only keep Amiya safe, but to protect as much of her innocence as possible. Your minds would be wiped, nearly clean, of all that happened and all the memories that led you to bring all this about. And, in her last act, Teresa entrusted her dream to Amiya. I mentioned before that the Lord of Fiends is the title for those that the crown chooses. The mechanism by which it chooses is poorly understood, but, in this case at least, Teresa herself crowned her successor. Physically, this was done by stabbing the authority into Amiya, and by the end of it, Amiya became the Lord of Fiends, the Outblood King, and a chimera, since from that day forward, her body and mind would begin reacting to certain things as a Sarkaz would, rather than a Cautus. If it's any small comfort, the process isn't quite as gruesome as that sounds. The pain and danger of it were more psychological in nature, like we discussed about the prophecy earlier. Doctor, are you alright? Sorry, a stupid question. Maybe we should... you want to keep going, Doctor? Alright then. Well, just so you know, I've set aside some time afterwards. If you'd like, I'll listen to anything you have to say. I know it can be difficult for you to keep a lot of these details hidden from the operators, especially the newly recruited generation. For now, maybe it'd improve the mood if I engaged the analytical part of your mind for a bit. There's a bit of theory I'd like your feedback on. You see, the means by which Amiya became a chimera actually has some precedent, I believe. Ifrit is like her in some ways. not the least of which being that she's a young girl forced to bear an unjust burden. Despite her current physiology, she is not a natural-born Sarkaz. Rather, she's a Savra, a race like felines or Kates, but with lizard-like features. Rather, there was once a tribe of Sarkaz known as Diablo, with metallic horns and power for fire, that mysteriously went extinct, leaving behind only metallic shards. These shards house encoded representations of their minds and bodies. You can see the similarities between these shards and the Black Crown, I'm sure. Ifrit was implanted with one of these shards by scientists in Colombia, and, just like Amiya became a chimera, Ifrit too underwent a transformation that led her taking the form of the Diablo of old. Of course, there are differences, not least of which being that Ifrit's case is far more purposefully cruel, the result of ethics and basic humanity, failing to constrain the ambition of those who experimented on her for... I'm just not realizing this isn't much better for the mood after all. Sorry, I promise I'm generally a lot more tactful with the operators, it's just... We will talk more about Ifrit soon, I promise. She doesn't deserve more people in her life trying to sweep her situation under the rug after all. But for right now, I just want to draw the parallel to Amiya's case and ask that you keep it in mind. Perhaps you'll come to some conclusion that will help them both in some way. Now, there's just one more thing I'd like to discuss before we're done for the day. But first, I'm going to insist on a break, Doctor. Do you prefer coffee or tea today? Keep in mind that even if it takes a minute longer, I'll have to insist on brewing it in the actual pot. Not that your technique isn't impressive as it is unnerving to watch.
Chernobog's reunion. It's over. And is there any more point to denouncing what they've done? Think of the people who trampled them, abused them, massacred them. Hatred breeds hatred. That was something that should have never happened in the first place.
It's getting late. Alright, let me make one final report, then we'll wrap up, Dokutah. A report on one particular moment in Amiya's story. A moment that everything we've talked about before should help you contextualize. Consider the moment that Amiya came across the flying Sarkaz warship in Norport. The moment she confronted the Revenant, that is to say, amalgamation of Sarkaz souls, that powered it. The Revenant spoke to Amiya of the Sarkaz's plight. It spoke of its hope for the king to lead them, of its hope for a king to take their hatred, the only part of them millennia had not withered away, and use it to slay their foes. Given their history, I can barely imagine a civilization on Terra that could be spared that blinding fury. It would mean apocalypse on a grand scale, just as the prophecy decreed. The Revenant then continues, however. It speaks of Amiya in disgust. It calls her a twisted chimera, an outblood king. It sees that she wields the Black Crown, sensing it in her, even without it physically manifesting. But, well, let me quote their words here. This crown is not yours to wear. This pain is not yours to stand with. This fury is not yours to stand for. Answer me, impostor. Answer me, fraud. This pain is not yours to stand with. We've already spoken of Amiya's status as the Chimera, of the unnatural way that her fate was tied to that of the Sarkaz. We've spoken of how powerful a weight she carries and how her life was transformed by it. And make no mistake, I consider Amiya to be a fine leader with a rare and genuine compassion for the world, but can the Sarkaz accept a king that is not truly of their blood? Should they accept such a king? It's one thing to aid a community that you're not a part of, but to lead them, to shape the direction of their future, to ask them to follow you and your vision. It's a complicated question. Perhaps your past self asked themselves the very same thing when they attempted, but failed, to infect themselves with oripathy. Perhaps your present self has an answer. Or maybe not. But let me give you the Revenant's argument in any case. After some back and forth, Amiya, despite knowing the dangers, allows the memories of the Sarkaz to flow through her. She proclaims that she has, does, and will continue to see the Sarkaz's suffering with open eyes. But the Revenant denounces her. I made you see, Chimera. I made you see. Imposter. There's not a single moment that I do not experience it, feel the burning flames, but you... Yes, you could see it, like a map, like a play, a mere passerby watching from above the cliffs. I denounce you, false king. I despise you. Not because of your foolishness, not because of your arrogance, not because of your conceit. it's because you can never truly stand with us. Amiya is capable of feeling their pain, but no matter how completely the crown allows her to experience it, she still does not live their pain. Certainly, the Sarkaz are no monolith in their own experiences. There is a wide range of experience even among the Sarkaz. There are those with more good luck than others. But while there is a difference between, say, a Colombian Sarkaz like Paprika and a Kazdel Sarkaz like W, let alone the difference between a vampire and a gargoyle, the Revenant makes a special distinction for Amiya, denounces her because, as he says, you could try not to avert your eyes, but you can still turn away any time you choose. You are not Sarkaz. You will never be. The souls of the Sarkaz reject you. You call our fate pain? You say you try to endure it? But we are fated to be buried by it for eternity. You say you have the courage, but if the day comes that you can take it no more, you can abandon us. And that is the crux of it. No matter where on Terra Sarkaz is born, no matter how blessed their life, they remain a Sarkaz. Most viscerally due to their innate ties to the mirrored souls that Amiya, arguably, merely channels through a crown. To add to that argument in Amiya's favor, though, I'd like to bluntly clarify something. Most Sarkaz aren't consciously aware of the myriad souls, in the sense that they don't normally experience it the same way the Revenant does. It has an effect in shaping them as they're born. If my theories are correct, a select few of them can tap into it through their arts, and upon death they will return to the mirrored souls to add their own experiences to the collective. All of this is incredibly notable, but I don't want you to think that every Sarkaz is exposed to their history with the same intensity and clarity as the Revenant. But I'd also like to point out another connection that ties the Sarkaz but excludes Amiya. The history of the Sarkaz, that which is embedded in their souls, that brings the word devil to the lips of others, will always be a part of their story even if they do not remember it, even if they are able to overcome it, even if they individually find happiness and acceptance. No matter how they wish to see the world will see them as Sarkaz. Let me use an example. Though obviously there is a rather large asterisk to his story, there's still an important perspective to be earned if you consider Colbert, the hotel manager. He was a Sarkaz who believed him Victorian, but had to hide his face to get his fellow Victorians to accept food from him when Teresa's moved to conquer Victoria and put his neighborhood into lockdown. A life of kindness, a humble heart, and a career of service could not erase the fact that he was a Sarkaz. Now, a Sarkaz could chop off their horns and try to blend in, but even putting aside the shame of that, the life they'd gain as a person hiding their blood wouldn't be quite the same as the life Amiya could choose to lead if she simply chose to live the rest of her life as a Kautis. Obviously, she would still have her own struggles, her oripathy not the least of them, but the struggle of the Sarkaz is one that she could choose to discard. I imagine that's a big part of why Ines chose to carve her horns, Caprine horns, to resemble a Sarkaz. Given her history with W and Hodor, it's hard to remember that she isn't, by blood at least, a Kazdel Sarkaz. But, like Amiya, she had a route open to her that Hodor or W wouldn't be able to walk. A route that she felt the need to close off for herself. I believe in large part to better tie herself to the life she considered her own. And yet, despite all that, I'm certain the Revenant would reject Ines if she wore the crown. There are times when people like Paprika or Trilby Asher note Ines's Caprine blood, note her as a false Sarkaz. I don't think I've seen anything else get quite the same pained reaction from her quite so consistently. But who knows, perhaps the Revenant would have thought differently of Amiya if her body had been transmuted like Ifrit's. An idle thought. Regardless, Amiya protests again that she would not abandon them, that she's determined to see things through as long as she lives. The Revenant doubts this, of course, partially because the young often say such confident, idealistic things, only to wither before the seasons. But, more importantly, I think, the Revenant challenges Amiya's resolve when he asks, "If you truly share the same feelings, now that you have seen it all, why do you come before me? Why do you try to stop this war?" And that is, simply, not something Amiya had an answer to at the moment. She wanted to stop this war. She wanted a gentler future. She wanted to live by Teresa's ideals, even if that meant standing against Teresa now. But Were these ideals things she could only hold on to because she had the ability to turn away from the Sarkaz's pain long enough to grow these feelings in herself? In the end, it's much the same question that she faced with reunion. She has seen that fury, felt that pain, touched upon the crushing desperation of their hearts. She asks herself, would she be in the right to deny them that rage, to demand that they let even that fire be snuffed out, all for the sake of her ideals? And for herself, whether she ought to feel that way or not, the blessings she's received thanks to Rhodes Islands makes her feel separated from the people who she wants to reach out to. I have my own beliefs on all this, Doctor. Amiya herself will come to a realization when she faces the echoes of Teresa, when she faces herself. But for tonight, I won't be giving you any more answers. I'll simply say that I believe in Amiya, and I stand firmly behind her as the leader Rhodes Islands needs to reach the future. And for her sake, I ask that you think on these questions for yourself. Let them twist in your heart as they do in hers. And then, as you experience her story, I hope that the two of you can walk hand in hand towards your answers. I hope that you can continue to be there for her. We'll talk more later, but until then, good night, Dokutah.
We've still got a long, long way to go, Doctor. This might be a journey without an end, but as long as you're with me, we'll be okay.